Signs of development are already underway, and a lot of people could be at big risk. What is up, weather enthusiasts? I'm your host, Pat's Path Predictor. Let's get right into the weather. All right, so here's the situation we have for you, ladies and gentlemen. We have quite a bit to go over with you guys today. We have some stuff firing in the East Pacific. We also are going to be talking about the Atlantic once again, as their hurricane season will be starting in 2 days. So we're going to be talking about tropics over there, as well as seeing what potential development we are looking at in both basins. So we have more of a jam-packed video for you guys. We're going to be going over a lot more. So we're going to go ahead and dive right into it right here. Starting off with the National Hurricane Center, we already have a big area of interest going on in the East Pacific. There will likely be another area of interest in the coming days nearer to Central America, as well nearer to North America off the coast of Mexico and Guatemala, as models have been showing some potential development over there as well. But here's what we have briefly from the National Hurricane Center as of 11 a.m. Pacific time, 2 p.m. Eastern time. So this is what we got for you right here. A broad area of low pressure is forecast to form early next week well to the southwest of the southern tip of Baja California. Environmental conditions appear conducive for additional development thereafter, and a tropical depression is likely to form in the middle part of next week while moving westward or west-northwestward at 10 to 15 miles per hour across the western portion of the East Pacific. 80% chance of formation in the next 7 days, so more of a long-term threat going on right here in the Eastern Pacific. Still watching this area as well as we go ahead and start looking at the ensembles and the models. So as we can see right here, we have our European ensembles. We have two big areas of development potentially. This one over here that's been tagged by the NHC, and this one that will likely be tagged in the coming days by the National Hurricane Center that's closer to Central America and Mexico. So we're going to go ahead and start with this one first, and then we'll go ahead and move further to the east. And what I'm seeing right here is basically we do have some tropical development expected. We have a lot of ensembles and a lot of model support for it. But the question is, how strong is it going to get? And based on what I am seeing, at least according to these runs, as well as some of the conditions I have been paying attention to, it doesn't look like it's going to be particularly that strong. Maybe a moderate to strong tropical storm on average at most. Outlier scenarios are maybe calling for hurricane strength down the line, but we're going to have to wait and see how this will ultimately pan out, because as soon as the system develops and starts to get its act together, the conditions start to get a little bit worse. You start seeing cooler water temperatures in that region. You also start seeing increased shear and more dry air potentially penetrating this as well. So that's kind of part of the reason why we don't have such a high ceiling on this system compared to what we are seeing further out to the east. And as we can see right here, this tells a pretty different story right here. And my goodness, things are getting pretty interesting over here. And as you can see right here, what we're looking at for the East Pacific, you're looking at quite a few ensembles with the European, a lot of ensembles, definitely with that support. I've checked the operational, that also has a lot of support, and these ensembles also have quite a bit of power with them. These are these are a number of ensembles that have power. Like looking at this right here, we have some ensembles that are down to the 9th. It's a bit of an outlier going off at a bit of a limb, but a lot of them are hurricane strength, but 937 millibars as one European ensemble is forecasting. Essentially, that's 30 runs for the European. That's kind of mashed together in this whole spaghetti plot right here. How many is this advocating for development? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, at least 15 to 20 right here. So that's more than half of the ensembles, and these ensembles have power, so, and quite a bit of pop with it as well. So that's definitely something that's going to be concerning if you're tuning in from El Salvador, Guatemala, and the southern region of Mexico, the southern coast right there. You're definitely going to want to pay attention to it as the season over here is going to start heating up pretty shortly. So that's what we're looking at with the European. Just for my own curiosity, what's the GFS ensembles going for? GFS ensembles are pretty similar, not as aggressive as the European, but definitely a lot of ensembles supporting pretty strong development, potentially up to hurricane strength in this part of the East Pacific. And that's going to be something to pay attention to moving down the line. We're going to have to watch out for that, especially as the operational runs start to get their act together more and more, and as more models start picking up on this, because right now this appears to be more of a long-term threat. When does this initially start going out? Let's go ahead and go back to, yeah, it doesn't really start showing too much until after 5 days out. Currently, it is May 30th. This would be for June 3rd to June 4th. This would be the at least from where the GFS has initialized right here. And then as we get to about 7 to 8 days out, so this is for June 7th, you're start noticing a lot more ensembles really starting to flare up. So this is definitely a situation where there is time for things to kind of organize and get its act together. And I think this is the reason why the NHC hasn't designated anything yet, because it's a little bit further out, but it's been consistently pumping out in the models. At some point, either tonight, tomorrow, or even the next couple of days, I do think the National Hurricane Center is going to tag this as an area of interest. And the reason I'm talking about this too is, number one, good practice for what we're going to be seeing in the Atlantic. And number two, I do know that there are some people who are probably on vacation in these areas that are probably tuning in as well, and is probably wondering, hey, are my vacation plans going to be disrupted? So that's kind of something that I've been kind of keeping a keen eye on. And I also know the EPAC is going to be very active this year, at least climatologically speaking. So that's kind of a reason why I'm keeping an eye on it more so now than I have been in years past. So with that being said, we have our ensembles. Let's take a quick look at our operational runs. And we can go ahead and start with our European. We can kind of use this view to look at the East Pacific as well. We also have like our West Atlantic view. Can definitely see the East Pacific, especially with this system over here. But we are going to go ahead and go to the EPAC just to take a quick gander at this other system that is expected to develop further to the west as well. So here's what we got for you guys right here. Situation starting to unfold. You start seeing some maybe a low pressure system starting to slowly get its act together. I'm pretty sure this is the area of interest right here, slowly starting to get its act together. The European has been a bit more conservative on it. Maybe tropical depression, tropical storm strength, around 1,005 millibars is where it ultimately starts to peak before starting to slowly get whittled down and to get a bit more disorganized before starting to strengthen again. But yeah, the European is favoring about a moderate tropical storm, winds about 50 miles per hour based on just taking a quick gander at the pressure. But I do want to see what our main sea level pressure winds are. Yeah, basically, yeah, they're kind of nearing tropical storm strength with that as well, according to the Euro. So kind of needing it to take its time to consolidate. But 1,000 millibar system is where this will ultimately peak by June 4th in that morning before starting to move into cooler waters and to some more wind shear. So that's definitely something that we're paying attention to. Now for this system over here, we have the system organizing, developing, slowly getting its act together right here. By the time we get to about 10 days out is when the operational Euro starts to slowly get its act together. And even then, the Euro operational still needs to kind of catch up a bit with the ensembles. But even still, 1,002 millibar, rather broad and large tropical storm over there, paying attention to that off the coast of Mexico, potentially up to hurricane strength as it brings impacts to these regions over here in southern Mexico as it starts to move and kind of hug the coast before moving out to sea and starting to weaken due to cooler waters and increased wind shear. And that is your European. So definitely an interesting situation starting to pull out over here. Now taking a quick gander at the GFS, here's the 0Z operational. We'll show the 12Z as well just to kind of see how things have changed. But here is your GFS system over here in this part of the Atlantic. Things are slowly getting their act together. 1,003 millibar system as the system starts to get its act together out here in the Eastern Pacific before starting to weaken due to shear and all of that jazz over there. And then as we start seeing some stuff flaring up over here in the eastern Pacific off the coast of Central America, you do see this low pressure system emerging off of the coast of Honduras and El Salvador, and then starting to slowly move towards this region near Guatemala and Mexico, slowly organizing to tropical storm strength, potentially 1,000 millibar, before quickly intensifying to about a 990 millibar system as it moves very close to the coast of Mexico right here, bringing some pretty significant impacts potentially before starting to hug the coast and move out to sea. The GFS kind of is going a bit more overboard, and by the time we get to June 12th, it's about 300 hours out. So obviously the strength of it does seem a bit unrealistic, but GFS calling for major hurricane strength with this system. It's definitely not. It's definitely. I wouldn't necessarily rule it out, but I find it very sketchy because of how far out. This is 14 days out. Models are going to change over time. Let's even see what the 12Z is going for. Yeah, the 12Z doesn't really show that situation nearly as much. In fact, 12Z is actually showing something completely different, where the system starts to slowly get its act together, rather gradually, hug even closer to the coast, potentially making landfall in southern Mexico before moving into the mountains and dissipating. So that's a bit of a shift compared to what we've seen 12 hours ago. And if that were the case, that would cause some pretty significant problems for a lot of those regions over here. So you're going to want to pay attention to this starting about 5 days out is when you need to start paying more attention. And I think the NHC will designate an area of interest in the next 2 days just to kind of accommodate for that as well. So that's kind of your situation that we're dealing with over here. And just for my own curiosity, I want to see what the Canadian run is going, because I know the Canadian isn't typically the best with tropical cyclones, but ultimately you do have the system starting to get its act together a little bit. It moves in the opposite direction for some reason before heading back towards Mexico and other parts of Central America and just making landfall and dissipating. It basically moves west and then swings back east and then swings back to the west again. And I'm wondering, how realistic is that from the Canadian? So that's kind of why I'm kind of using that as more of a throwaway, and just kind of seeing, okay, it's showing development, but everything past it is very iffy, to say at the very least. So that's kind of what we're dealing with right here. So ultimately, East Pacific, yeah, you're definitely going to be seeing some big development. Some potential impacts are definitely there, and we're going to have to keep you updated on that situation. But now shifting over to the Atlantic, let's go ahead and take a quick look, and let's go ahead and talk about it. Hurricane season starts in 2 days. What are we potentially looking for? Well, there's a few things that we're going to be looking for over there, and that is potential tropical development. That is our conditions. That is our water temperatures. That is our wind shear, dry air aspect to all of it, and our ocean heat content. So definitely we're going to want to pay attention to that as well. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about this in the time that we have left over here. So let's go ahead and start with our operational run to kind of see, okay, what are we looking at? What are the conditions going to be looking like? And how can we potentially forecast with this? So with that, we'll go ahead and take a quick look at our wind shear, and we'll go ahead and take a quick look at our anomalies as well. So here is our wind shear map right here, kind of more so backing off in parts of the western Atlantic over here in the Gulf region and parts of the southwestern Atlantic basin, parts of the Caribbean, kind of backing off compared to what we've seen previously, where we've seen 50 plus knots of wind shear in that region right there. We're going to have to pay attention to that moving forward. But as time continues to go on, this shear does start to fluctuate up and down, mainly starting to reconsolidate to that strong shear from before. There is a ton of shear in the main development region at this current point, and for any tropical development to kind of take place over there, you're going to need to see this wind shear shift up to the north or weaken, and that typically doesn't start happening until towards late June and early July, when we start seeing those shifts start to take place. So we'll have to watch out, and we'll have to see how this tropical jet starts to move further to the north. So you have all of this going on right here, and then as time continues to go on, as we get to 5 days out, you're seeing more shear really ramping up in parts of the Gulf as well. And then as we continue to move further along the line that we start seeing a bit of an increase of wind shear going up and down, and even starting to break down a little bit in the Caribbean as well. And you're also noticing a bit of a break at the same time. So the reason I'm bringing all of this up is to kind of see, okay, what is the pattern going to be looking like for the next 2 weeks? And ultimately, the pattern I'm noticing with this is the Western Atlantic is definitely kind of all over the place. Even in the Caribbean, it's kind of all over the place too. And that kind of surprised me a little bit compared to what I've seen previously. Because typically, what I've noticed is there's a lot of wind shear in the Caribbean and in parts of the main development region, and in the Gulf is more of a bit of a wild card. This year is a bit more interesting, and it's definitely something I'm watching down for kind of down the line. Because if you're seeing a situation where you're seeing more fluctuation in wind shear in the Gulf and in the Caribbean, and maybe a low pressure system starts to kind of get organized off the Central American gyre, it's a possibility that maybe something could come of it, maybe something won't, but it does increase that probability, at least for short-term development. What I'm not saying is we're going to see hurricanes in June. My goodness, if we see another Hurricane Beryl situation in a 2026 El Nino type, I will probably shit myself, honestly. And yes, that is my one cursed word of the day, but ultimately, yeah, I'm thinking like if something does come of this pattern, it will likely be in the Western Atlantic, most likely in the Gulf or in the extreme northwestern Caribbean, and kind of end up becoming a weak tropical storm as a result, similar to what we saw last year with Barry as well. So that's kind of what I'm paying attention to. So that's what we have going on for the next couple of weeks, mainly fluctuations in the Western Atlantic, more so than what I was honestly expecting, and mainly remaining consistent in most of the main development region. And that's also, let's go ahead and take a quick look at our anomalies, because I want to know how much different is this. And the answer is, at least compared to what we've seen for the climatological mean, it is quite a bit different. As a matter of fact, seeing all these fluctuations right here for the Gulf, for parts of the Caribbean, you do start seeing that increase in shear, but you are starting to kind of see those fluctuations going back and forth, going from below average to above average to below average to above average. Consistently in the main development region, it is above average, but if you move further to the west, it's a bit more of a wild card right here, and that is definitely a bit of a difference compared to what I saw last year, because last year what I noticed was the wind shear was definitely kind of still being a bit stubborn in parts of the Caribbean and in even a little bit in the Gulf as severe weather season was still going on, but in the main development region, things were kind of going a bit more iffy, although it was relatively consistent. This year, we are seeing more consistently above average shear in the MDR, but less so in parts of the Western Atlantic, in the western half of the Caribbean, and in the Gulf. So that's definitely an interesting situation right there. And if something does develop, if it takes advantage of that below average shear and kind of takes advantage of those breaks, definitely something will be panning out, and definitely something could end up spinning up briefly. So that's going to be a situation, and it's even going to be a problem too, especially compared to what we've seen going on with land, especially with its proximity to land, excuse me. So with that being said, I do want to check our moisture component to all of this, because this is kind of going to be the main thing, at least especially going into June and July, that I'm going to be watching out for, because shear is going to be consistent, but what's the dry air aspect of it? What's the Sahara air layer going to be like across the Atlantic? Well, there is a bit of a mixed bag with this too, I would say. On the one hand, you do see more moisture in the north, and kind of in near North America and near Cuba, and even in parts of the southwestern Caribbean and in the Gulf. That's typically to be expected as you see more storms, whether they're of subtropical, mesoscale, or even being mid-latitude in nature, kind of starting to form and move through right here. But in the main development region, it's kind of a bit of a mix of everything, because yes, you still have strong wind shear, but you do have a more mixed moisture component to all of this across much of the MDR, especially going in the next week. Yes, it does start to get refilled with dry air, but that is a curious case that I'm watching, and even taking a quick look at not the humidity, but the precipitable water anomalies. Yeah, they're a little bit drier than average, but across parts of the Gulf and the Caribbean, they're actually more moist than average, which is an intriguing situation to look at right there. So definitely something that we're going to want to watch out for, and it's definitely something we're going to continue to keep an eye on here on the Pat's Path Predictor channel. But with that being said, we're going to go ahead and close the video out right here. Be sure to like and subscribe if you are new. Goal, as always, is to get more people engaged with weather. Join the Storms United Discord server. And with that being said, have a wonderful day, guys. Stay safe.